There are things that are wildly different when it comes down to the food, the culture, the dietary strategy, the meal timing in Europe compared to the United States. Definite differences, but there are also some things that when we look at Europe from the outside in, we might have a little bit of a warped perception on what's actually happening. Like the first one, I'll just throw right out there. It's a common misconception that the Mediterranean diet or European culture doesn't eat a lot of meat. Now, they may not eat as much as you do in the United States, but it's definitely not low meat. Ask anyone that's lived in Europe or anyone that is there now, and they'll tell you, wait a minute, we eat a fair bit of like lean meats. We also eat a fair bit of fatty cuts of meat. So it seems as though in other areas, at least in the United States, we make it sound like they're almost plant-based. It's kind of interesting. I don't know why that happens, but at the end of the day, there's still a decent amount of meat consumption. So that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about. It's like these misconceptions or like warped perceptions of what the Mediterranean or just European diets are like in general. Now, full disclaimer, like, yes, I live in the United States, but I did live in Europe when I was a kid. I went to school there. I lived in Italy, and I've also spent a fair bit of time there. And I do spend a lot of time looking into this sort of thing. And also with an audience my size, I do have some luxuries of being able to talk to a lot of different people in a lot of different places and get a full understanding. Okay, so the first other thing that I want to mention outside of this protein thing is that Europe is a large landmass, right? So there are a lot of different sort of sub-diets. So to say that, hey, the European diet is different or European food is different, well, yes, it is wildly different from the United States, and there's general regulation that makes it as such. But we also have to understand that there's food quality differences in different regions and different countries. Okay, so it's going to vary widely. For example, like Poland, they are somewhat notorious for having slightly lower quality food standards compared to, say, Italy has really high quality food standards in different categories, compared to like Scandinavia has really high food quality when it comes down to like honey. Like they can't touch the honey. Like that is such a very prized, important part of their cultural norm. Point is that a lot of times, especially in America, we look at Europe and we're like, oh, Europeans. Well, there's a very, very distinct difference between different regions. In the Mediterranean regions alone, there are distinct differences. Spain, Italy, Greece. I mean, all these are wildly different. So we do have to understand that. But it's also where we can find common denominators and see, this must be what works the best. The next thing is there are huge cultural norms and different regulations in different areas. And it's sort of combining what I talked about in the last one with a little bit more nuance. You see, for example, Italy, they are very, very protective of their pasta, of their carbohydrates, of wheat. There's a lot of sort of cultural regulation in a way. It's not top-down EU regulation, but each region has so much history that they have certain things that they just dare not touch. I mentioned Scandinavia and their honey. It's pretty much illegal, like in Finland, for example. Technically not Scandinavia, but kind of still Nordic, right? So it's kind of still Scandinavia. Like if they cannot not have raw honey. They have to have raw honey. If they pasteurize it, it actually becomes essentially illegal from almost a cultural standpoint. Okay, so there's just different standards, and those can be accepted across different regions. So for example, in Italy, there might be higher standards on pasta than maybe you'd find in Spain. I mean, things like that. So we do have to understand that these regulations and cultural norms do sort of influence the way different regions eat. The next one is something that I'm not a super expert on, but I know enough probably to be dangerous, and just at least enough to educate people a little bit. When you look at the EU and you look at trade within the European Union, it's treated domestically, right? So importing something from Italy into Spain is basically the same as importing something from Nevada into California in the United States. Okay, the EU, it makes it so that trade is easy. Now, what's cool about this is that since Europe is a relatively large landmass, I mean, compared to other continents, it's not, but decent large landmass with like varying regions and lots of different types of crop and lots of different types and ability to grow things in different regions. Well, because of this, they can take something that grows in Italy and easily import it up north to Scandinavia, without having to deal with a lot of regulation because the EU allows for this free trade across European country lines, right? So it makes it that much easier. Whereas coming into the EU is a lot harder. So what this means in a lot of ways is that because Europe is small enough landmass to transfer things fast, but large enough landmass to have a variety of different foods, regions in Europe can get pretty good high quality food from other areas of Europe without much problem. It doesn't have to sit at a border for a long period of time. This is really, really good. Compare that to the United States. We do get a wide variety of food within the United States, but most of our stuff is imported, right? So if you get an avocado from Mexico or you get something from South America, it has to travel really far and then it sits on a shelf. And then, it could be weeks before it's consumed, whereas in Europe, it's probably consumed much faster. Next up, number 5, it's hard to import from the US into Europe. And there is this common misconception that, like even in Italy, they say, oh, well, a lot of the American pasta is coming in and it's ruining things. Not quite. This has actually been something that has been really hard economically in terms of the trade with the US anyway. We've been trying for a long time to try to increase the ability for Europe to buy our food. They don't want to buy our food in the United States because our regulations in terms of food quality aren't that high. This is a real trade issue. So this is somewhat of a misconception, and I think it might be sort of put there to make it seem like it's not this naturalistic fallacy that Europe has this amazing food and America doesn't. The sad reality of it, no matter where you stand on any dietary spectrum, the food quality is better and the regulations are stronger in Europe than they are in the United States, which is why they don't typically buy our food. So we do need to understand that there's definitely a difference and it trickles down economically. But this isn't an economic channel, this is a food channel. But I just want to make sure that that's known because I hear people talk about it a lot and it's just not true. Number 6 is people will say that there's not as much processed food. If you walk through the grocery store shelves in Europe, in just about any area, there's still a lot of processed food. There is. Now, there's probably more regulation. And when I look at the processed food in Europe, I don't see as much nefarious, weird culprits in there, I will be honest. But the processed food problem is a problem there too. Okay, now, no denying the United States has the highest, one of the highest, if not the highest, concentration of processed food consumption. In Europe, it's significantly lower. In Italy, you're looking more like 5% versus 50, 60%, depending where you're looking in the US. Point is that it's still a very real thing and the consumption is still very, very high. So go through any grocery store shelf, but take a look at the labels there and you might notice a few key differences, right? There's not as much in the way of additives and preservatives and whatnot, but I'm not gonna get into the weeds too much there. Before I get into the next one, I did put a link down below for 30% off through Thrive Market. The reason that I mention them here is Thrive Market has a lot of Mediterranean style foods, including quote unquote processed foods that are better options, right? Because when we talk about processed foods, the problem is most American processed foods are quite nefarious, to say the least. So Thrive goes for quote unquote better for you options that don't have the garbage added into them. They also have sustainable meat and seafood options. They also have all kinds of ways that you can sort by diet category, like Mediterranean, like by keto, by this, by that. So it makes it really easy to shop in a healthy way. Plus, that 30% off discount link gets you 30% off your entire first grocery orders. That whole first grocery order is 30% off, plus you get a free gift. They've been a sponsor on this channel for pushing a decade. They really have been here for a long time. I've supported them for a long time. They've supported this channel for a long time because we see eye to eye on the types of foods they carry. So everything gets delivered right to your doorstep. You can shop from the comfort of your home and say, hey, I need this. You can be deliberate about it and not walk through a grocery store hungry buying all the wrong things. Trust me, it does change your life, especially once you make it a normal habit. So that link is down below, top line of the description, 30% off your entire first grocery order. This next one is going to ruffle some feathers, okay, because it's different. The regulation on food and supplements in Europe is much, much higher. That comes at a cost, right? So in the United States, there's more flexibility, there's less regulation on food, which is kind of nice because it's hey, Free market, I can bring something to market and not have a ton of regulation on it. There's still a lot of regulation, but like Europe holds their food to a high standard. So there's a lot more regulation. So take that for what it's worth. It's good and it's bad. On one hand, you have sort of the government saying like, you can't eat this, you can't eat that, which is not always a good thing. But on the other hand, the things that they're choosing really do seem to be protecting the people a little bit more. In the United States, it's a little more loose, which allows for more capitalism and more growth and more ability to scale these things and advertise, but that comes at potentially a metabolic or a health cost, right? So it's like on one hand, there's this like freedom of choice and free market capitalism and this and that, and then on the other side, you've got, okay, tighter regulation, but possibly better control in terms of the types and the quality of food. So people don't always understand that like Europe just has tight regulation, but that's not always what people want. The grass isn't always greener. So I just encourage people to look at it from that perspective. Which leads me to the next one, number 8. Advertisement is wildly different. And this is where I am aligned. It's hard to advertise like sugary cereals to kids. There's even some, I don't know if it still exists. I know a few years ago, like you couldn't put like cartoon characters, you couldn't create this association with kids and like sugary things. You weren't able to advertise that way. You're not able to advertise certain foods on TV at certain hours. You're not able to advertise on kids networks in certain ways. So there's less like ability to say, hey, let's get you just conditioned to eating this food this way. Okay, food is cultural, food is relationship. So they keep a close wolf at the door to that so that we don't lose that, or they don't lose that, right? That is where I'm definitely aligned. And in the supplement category, like I was talking to my friend Tero Isokopala, he's the founder of Four Sigmatic, but he's from Finland and he knows a lot about this area. And he was telling me that to advertise even supplements there, like he can only say like 2 things. In the United States, you can make a lot of claims. And it's all about saying like, how do I thread the needle and make these certain claims in such a way where I don't get in trouble, but I can slightly be misleading, right? There's a lot of that dance. Supplements in Europe, I mean, you can't really say stuff that's even well documented. So good and bad, but it also means that like, you're not gonna have this crazy advertisement. So it puts the onus on the person to do their own research and educate themselves rather than blindly trust an advertiser, which I think is good just in general. Teaches people, hey, no, I gotta take care of myself. I have to be responsible. I have to take extreme ownership of myself and not just rely on what I'm being told and just sort of glaze over life, trusting that whoever's marketing to me has my best interest in mind, because they probably don't. Anyway, on to the next. Number 9, I want to mention this naturalistic fallacy. Now, I am a believer that nutrient quality matters. And naturalistic fallacy is much more referring to like a Darwinism type thing, and it gets blown out of proportion. I say that because online we say, this is a naturalistic fallacy. If people say that this food qualities, that's not quite the same. Okay, so I just want to clear that up first and foremost. But a lot of times we'll say, okay, Europe has higher food quality, and that is why they're healthier. I agree that the food quality is better, but I don't know if that's always why they're healthier. I don't know if it top down comes from the food or if it comes from their lifestyle first. And I just want to put thoughtful acknowledgement out there. And I'm curious actually what you think. You can put it in the comment section below. There's no right or wrong answer. Does the food influence their activity and their lifestyle, or does their lifestyle influence the types of foods they eat? Is it the nutrient quality that makes them a richer, healthier group of people? Or is it the lifestyle and it just so happens that they eat this way? Because I'm not convinced that just because there's less preservatives and less additives that it automatically makes them healthier. I think that is a good thing. I think less chemicals and less weird, mysterious stuff is good. But I don't think that is the thing that makes it or breaks it. I think that is just one aspect of it, but that's my opinion. I think the fact that they're active, they walk a lot, they move a lot, they have good, close relationships, and food is like assimilated into their body in a way that this is part of life versus just like transactional, I need my calories, I'm hungry, right? There's a lot more to it than that. Number 10 is the big one, because you see a lot of people say, hey, I went to Italy or I went to Europe and I ate a bunch of sweets and I still lost weight. This is very real. This does happen. And I think the food quality plays a role. But don't be mistaken. Okay, there is a short-term impact that can happen and a long-term effect. If people go to Europe and maybe live there for a year and they continue to eat like they're on vacation, there might be a problem, right? If you eat 5 croissants and a beignet and then you go and you get a cannoli and you get gelato and you do that every day longer than a 2 or 3 week vacation, it might start to add up. I mean, sure, you can gain weight in 2 or 3 weeks, definitely on a vacation, but perhaps the fact that you're going there and you're changing your environment, everything is different, you're active, you're happy, or your cortisol levels are lower, that does play a big role too. That being said, I am in the camp that the food is better. I lived in Italy for a month just this year, or I lived in Italy and France, and I noticed that I was much more relaxed on my diet and my body looked better, but I was also more active, but I felt better and I wanted to be more active. But one thing you have to understand is that in given regions, like people aren't, when they're living there, they might have a croissant and an espresso for breakfast, or they might have even a pastry of some kind that's sweet and coffee. But they're not like also going to gelato and also there's a lot of tourist traps, remember that, okay? And just because what you see through a tourist lens is a lot of sweets and a lot of this, that doesn't necessarily mean that when you live there, you're eating that way. You start to develop normal life and you make good choices, just like you can make good choices in the United States. It just so happens that the choices you have the ability to make are better because there's more in front of you that's better. As always, keep it locked in here on my channel, and I'll see you tomorrow.